Okay, good evening. Welcome everyone to the 2019 President's Dream Colloquium at SFU. Before we begin, I'd like to first acknowledge that we stand tonight on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. So my name is Mark Brockman. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at SFU, HIV researcher. And my studies have really mostly been HIV host virus interactions, hopefully generating some data that will help us to develop a vaccine or potentially a cure for HIV infection. So in 2011, SFU's president, Andrew Petter, announced the President's Dream Colloquium, which is an initiative that brings together leading thinkers to SFU to provide a forum for intensive interdisciplinary exchanges on a range of topics. The theme for this colloquium is HIV from Cell to Society. This theme reflects SFU's Faculty of Health Sciences, which supports faculty researchers, students, and community partners and investigators in multidisciplinary programs spanning all aspects of health, including clinical research, biomedical research, population health, and research on quality and access to health services. This multidisciplinary approach has made SFU an innovator in HIV research, both locally as well as globally. And in particular, I'd like to thank a large number of people who are members of the SFU Interdisciplinary Research Center for HIV, or SEARCH, for their work and leadership in preparing for this colloquium series. While there are too many people, members in SEARCH, to name all of them tonight, I'll encourage you to go to the SFU website and check out their names and their research. That's quite broad and interdisciplinary and expansive. So SEARCH exemplifies SFU's innovative model for health research and allows scientists and students across a broad spectrum of disciplines to engage in research from the humanities, social sciences, life sciences, as well as clinical research. I'd also like to thank the BC Center for Excellence in HIV/AIDS for their support for this colloquium series. The BCCFE is Canada's largest HIV research, treatment, and educational facility, and is recognized both nationally as well as internationally as a leader in combating HIV-related diseases. Under the directorship of Dr. Julio Montaner, the center's treatment as prevention strategy has inspired ambitious global goals, including the UN AIDS 90-90-90 targets to end the HIV global pandemic by 2030. Finally, I'd like to thank the faculty and staff who have organized and supported the colloquium, including SFU's Office of the President, Office of the Vice President, Office of the Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, and other sponsors and supporters that are listed on the slide here behind me. So with that, and without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Dr. Glenda Gray. So Dr. Gray is the current CEO and president of the South African Medical Research Council. She's also a co-principal investigator of the International HIV Vaccine Trials Network, as well as director of the HVTN's African programs. She's also a professor of pediatrics at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Among her many accolades, Dr. Gray is a recipient of the Nelson Mandela Health and Human Rights Award for her work in the field of HIV perinatal infection and transmission. She's also selected as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2017. I'll also note that Glenda is a friend of SFU and received an honorary doctorate, a Doctor of Science award in 2012 from the faculty in Simon Fraser University. Glenda has a long history of collaboration with people in Vancouver, and particularly at SFU, including Drs. Bob Hogg, Angela Kaida, and myself, and so we appreciate her for all of that she's done for our research here in Vancouver and internationally. So Dr. Gray's presentation tonight is entitled Towards a Vaccine for HIV. I look forward to hearing her thoughts on this important topic, and please welcome me in joining Glenda.
Bring my slides away. Oops, let's start from the beginning. Good evening. Are you still standing? Is everybody still standing? I am, although it's like about 4 in the morning, so I'm in South Africa. So I'm going to give you a talk about why we need an HIV vaccine And because this is a public forum, I'm not going to talk a lot of science. I'm going to show you a few data slides, but I'm going to rather paint the picture about why we need an HIV vaccine and tell you a little bit about the epidemic in South Africa, how it began, and what fueled the epidemic in Africa. But first of all, I wanted to acknowledge the relationship that Simon Fraser has with South Africa. And I put the pictures of Angela, Bob, and Mark on here. And we were just doing some counting today. And we have about a decade relationship with Simon Fraser. And for that decade, we've published a paper a month for the last 10 years. So that's pretty awesome. From the collaboration, we also have produced about a PhD every 2 years, roughly. So that's also pretty awesome for a 10-year collaboration. And so, and then as well, I haven't spoken about the masters and the postdoc support. But there is a wonderful collaboration, and so I'd like to acknowledge the relationship, and I hope it thrives and continues to continue for many years. So thank you very much. Angela, Bob, and Mark, it's very great to be here. So I just wanted to step back and, as an HIV researcher and as an HIV clinician in South Africa, just to step back and just reflect and contextualize my talk. And so HIV, as a doctor in South Africa, HIV has been the epidemic of my time, and HIV has been the epidemic of our time. And it has consumed the energy of the world in both the 20th and 21st century. It exposed, particularly in South Africa and in the beginning of the epidemic in the United States, both our medical deficiencies and largely our global social inequalities. And this continues particularly in the low middle income countries. It formulated careers like myself and great institutions like the institution that we have here in Vancouver. It also created great weapons to fight HIV, and they've been incredibly novel, and particularly the activism, Treatment Action Campaign in South Africa, TAG, both the Global Fund, UNAIDS, and PEPFAR have been great weapons which can be replicated for other diseases. The epidemic also affected me personally. It has been a case of almost all of my colleagues, and probably everybody sitting here has been personally affected by HIV. So it's something that we hold very closely to our heart. It pulled me from a pediatrician in a hospital in Soweto into medical research. And it is a career that I did not expect to follow. I was going to run a ward at the Baragwanath Hospital, and HIV exploded at that time. And so for me, my experience around HIV has revolved a lot around young women and their children. And in a lot of ways, HIV has enriched me, the epidemic, but it also has embattled our lives, particularly in South Africa, and continues to battle our lives, as you see, as I paint the picture of HIV in South Africa. So this is the face of HIV in South Africa. It's usually a young woman who's diagnosed with HIV when she falls pregnant, and often a lot of comorbidities like tuberculosis. And so this woman is a woman at one of our mothers in our hospital who has both HIV and TB, and she's been followed up for TB in our clinic. But it also has a huge intergenerational effect, and this has been quite devastating in South Africa and in most parts of Africa. The whole intergenerational issues, grandmothers looking after young children, and the loss of their firstborn children, and looking after children of many brothers and sisters. And so it has been a very devastating impact on family life in South Africa. So all of you know, because you all have a big passion for HIV, it's globally, HIV has affected more than 70 million people, and already 35 million people have died, and around 37 million people are living with HIV, with sub-Saharan Africa bearing the brunt of the epidemic. South Africa has paid the largest price for the HIV epidemic. We have the largest epidemic in the world, And it has also impacted negatively on our demographic dividend, with almost 7 million people. We almost 8 million people now being infected, and most of these are young people in their reproductive age group. And so there are three reasons why South Africa, which I believe, three reasons why I think we got to be the epicenter of HIV. And the first reason is that there was a vibrant biological context within which HIV was introduced into South Africa. So we have to look at the HIV transmission dynamics and also the social determinants of disease in South Africa. So as you know, the epidemic that affects South Africa is a Clades epidemic. And this epidemic starts to take hold in South Africa around 1985 up until 2000. And it marks the opening up of South Africa post-apartheid and the return of exiles into South Africa, as well as the migrant labour system that drew male migrant labour from southern Africa to work on the mines in Johannesburg. The subtype C is mostly in South Africa, but you also see it in China, India and Brazil. And globally, subtype C accounts for almost 40% of all infection, and that is why finding a vaccine that's aimed at this would help the burden of HIV at a global level, even though it's seen very much in China, India, Brazil, and southern Africa. Johannesburg, the city where I come from, still remains the major centre for HIV transmission. And this is a lovely paper in Nature with Tulio Oliveira from KwaZulu-Natal, who looked at some of the, who did a phylogenetic analysis and looked at some of the spread of HIV in South Africa. So Johannesburg remains the major centre, and this is because obviously it's the source of cheap male labour. People migrate into Johannesburg. The first place you come to from a rural area or from other parts of Africa is into Johannesburg, and HIV then is spread mostly through Johannesburg, but we do see some spread from KwaZulu-Natal into Johannesburg through the migrant labour system. In terms of the transmission dynamics, this slide has been adapted from some of the work that has been done by some in Croatia, and try and understand the transmission dynamic that we have in South Africa. So first of all, we see that there is a high incidence of HIV in adolescents and young women. And these women grow up and become prevalent HIV-infected women who are in their reproductive age group. They develop same-age relationships with men. They infect men. These men then go on to have transgenerational sex with young women. And so the cycle continues unabated. And if you have to try and interrupt HIV, you would look at different aspects of where you would try and start. So for HIV-infected women who are having same-age relationships, obviously making sure they're on treatment, making sure they're diagnosed and on treatment, and so they're taking the treatment, and the aviremic will prevent the transmission to men. Men should be allowed to accept medical male circumcision, and that's one way of protecting them. And obviously for young women, biomedical interventions like HIV vaccines or microbicides and PrEP would be ideal to prevent them getting HIV infection from transgenerational relationships. And so in South Africa, and mostly in the most parts of Southern Africa, we failed to address these issues because we have to see this in the context of the socioeconomic and political situation that women and men live with in Southern Africa. And so you have the interplay between society, the relationship of women in a patriarchal society, the biological, the things that make women susceptible to HIV, and of course the pathogen. And so one of the biggest things at a societal level is the issue of what we call blessers or sugar daddies, or men and women, men who exchange for money, exchange sex with young women, and this creates a whole level and it drives the socioeconomic vulnerability of women in South Africa. And this is just a cartoon from one of the newspapers that we call these men blessers because they bless women with gifts, and this is how women are vulnerable to HIV. And so we see a lot of this in universities and technical colleges, where girls will have sex with men so that they can have food, or they have names for these men. They call them automatic teller machines, ATMs. My Minister of Finance, or my Minister of Transport. And so this is the names that young women give their blessers. And if you have a look at the relationship between men and women in South Africa, you start to see why you can get both direct transmission of HIV and indirect. And so obviously in South Africa we have a gender and relationship power inequality. And this stems from rape or sexual abuse or intimate partner violence. And this causes women to engage with risky male partners. And so you have a more controlling and violent relationships. There's a lot of issues with masculinity in South Africa, and obviously more risk-taking and more likely to get HIV and STIs. And so when you have gender and gender relationship inequalities, you can often get rape, which can cause HIV. We have a large prevalence of rape in South Africa. Obviously, the indirect transmission is around the psychological distress, your post-traumatic stress disorder leading to substance use, leading you to have more risky sex, and women having reduced protective powers to negotiate safer sex, and more likely to acquiesce to having sex that's unprotected. So this is the cycle that women face in South Africa, and it's around patriarchy and gender inequality. And so to navigate the social behavioral aspects of HIV, you'd have to also address the issues of masculinity and patriarchy in South Africa. The second reason why HIV took grip in South Africa was in a situation of a very toxic political context. So first of all, we have the transmission dynamics, and then you have a context, a political context. And at the time when HIV took hold in South Africa, there was a toxic political context. The government led an AIDS denialism program that fueled the epidemic further by not acting when you really needed to act on this. And so we had the villains, which was our government, who propelled AIDS denialism. Our president at the time said that he did not know anyone that had HIV, and at that stage he set a presidential panel together to work with the AIDS denialists at a global level, and there was a kind of battle between the orthodox scientists and the AIDS denialists. I'm sure, Peggy, you'll remember the drama that ensued in South Africa, but this caused a lot of damage because people didn't believe that HIV existed. They believed their president. He was a very clever man, and it helped propagate the poor response that South Africa had. But obviously this led to Thabo Mbeki being overthrown by Jacob Zuma, and another course of history happened. But we also had the Euros at that time, and that was the treatment action campaign. Very quickly, people who were HIV infected in South Africa knew the only way that they could address the issues that was happening is to have a very vocal and responsive advocacy against the government, and to fight for both interventions to prevent mother-to-child transmission, but also at that stage treatment. And so we had a civil society that was mobilized around treatment issues. So even though we had, we have a political context that starts, but we also have a government that showed a lack of strength and velocity of response. And so we only started to engage with the HIV epidemic from about 2003 onwards, and we saw the scale-up of antiretroviral therapy and the PMTCT program really only starting to ramp up in about the mid-2000s. And so in the 2000s, we did see ourselves changing our trajectory. In 2001, we saw Cipla vying to make cheap ARVs, And Cozy Johnson, one of the children who had HIV, he died in 2001. In 2002, we see HIV becoming the leading cause of death worldwide. And we also see our government being forced to provide mother-to-child transmission interventions through a constitutional court action. In 2003, we see PEPFAR being announced, HEART becoming a reality, and our first HIV vaccine being approved by the Medicines Control Council. And at the same time as Mbeki refuses to believe that anyone has died of AIDS in South Africa. So with the rollout of antiretrovirals, we eventually managed to change the trajectory. So this is what South Africa looked like in 2012. Eventually we see HIV/AIDS deaths coming down, peaking at around 2004, 2005, antiretrovirals starting to take hold, and a dramatic effect of deaths from HIV and TB coming down, which was amazing, and given that at this stage only about 3 million people were on antiretroviral therapy in South Africa. We see adult mortality, so if you're looking at between 2000 and 2017, you see the dramatic reduction in adult mortality, but you start to see from about 2012 onwards a stagnation of deaths. And so although we've really made a good bump in the mortality, we're starting to stagnate. And so while we're stagnating, not enough diagnosis, people not initiated, and people falling off treatment has an impact on the stagnation of our adult mortality. And this is particularly pronounced in young adults. So still today, if you look at our 15 to 59-year-old age group, you can see that the burden of deaths, natural deaths, so this is very sad. When you call a natural death a death, when you're between 15 and 59. So you can still see that what's causing the stagnation of mortality is our lack of control of the HIV epidemic in our young people in South Africa. And the other curves are what we expect. As life expectancy increases, you start to see deaths in the over 60s. But this is the middle section is a very sad secular trend to show that we still haven't managed to control natural deaths in young adults. If you look at our life expectancy, you can see that we have made quite dramatic gains. We're trying to get to at least 65 of a life expectancy. We're around 64.2 total, with obviously a life expectancy in women being much more than in men, and our under 5 mortality rate starting to come down, but also evidence of stagnation. And quite sad, the fact our neonatal mortality rate in South Africa has not budged for 10, 15 years. So if you look at our childhood mortality in South Africa, you can see again the dramatic effect of ARTs. So rolling out the PMTCT program and starting treatment has definitely reduced the childhood mortality. But again, we seem to be stagnating from about 2012. And there could be lots of reasons for this, and probably the biggest reason is our neonatal mortality that's not declining, but also at the same time our health system is crumbling, which reflects the lack reflects the stagnation of our childhood mortality in South Africa. So our stagnating efforts for treatment and prevention don't bode well for our epidemic. So we're in big trouble in South Africa. I'm showing you stagnating mortality. I'm showing you still lots of natural deaths in young people. And we're not doing well as a country when it comes to treatment and prevention. And so if you have a look at the 90-90-90 program, where the premise that if you diagnose 90% of people who are HIV infected, get them onto treatment, and have them viremically suppressed, you can prevent onward transmission of HIV. What we have seen with antiretroviral rollout is that it has an impact on global deaths. And as of yet, it hasn't, in some areas, I guess in British Columbia and Vancouver, you have reductions as you roll out treatment as prevention, but in hyper-endemic places like South Africa, we've yet to see the impact on onward transmission. And so what we have seen is that the treatment saturation has not been adequately met to achieve impact on HIV incidence at a global level. In the US, you consistently have between 40,000 and 50,000 infections and not much movement. And in South Africa, clearly we haven't managed to curtail the HIV incidence as to what we required, and as well as our evidence of stagnation in our PMT-CT program, showing that we need to do something much more bolder to try and prevent mother-to-child transmission. And most of the transmission is occurring during breast milk transmission, and so we have to try and find better ways of preventing postnatal transmission through breastfeeding. And so South Africa, as we sit and talk now, will never be anywhere near the 0.1% target by 2030. And so this is a very sad state to be in, and one of the reasons why we need an HIV vaccine. And we need an HIV vaccine because we're stuck in a protracted health transition. And so we're just stuck in this interface between communicable and non-communicable diseases. So normally, as a country develops, you go from being a country that has a lot of deaths from infectious diseases to a lot of deaths from non-communicable diseases like cancer, stroke, and cardiovascular disease. And in South Africa, we're stuck here. We're stuck in a protracted transition because we can't manage the communicable diseases like HIV and TB, which is going to bankrupt our health system. And so what we see at this moment in time, a cocktail of four colliding epidemics. So South Africa has 23 times the global burden of HIV and 7 times the global burden of TB. We also have a maternal and child health mortality problem where, if we compare ourselves to our comparable countries, we have the mortality rates of 2 to 3 times more than countries of our own GDP status. We have a problem of non-communicable diseases where we have about a burden of about 2 to 3 times our NCD rate as other developing countries. And to top it all, we also have a huge epidemic of violence and injury. And so we have to keep our eye on all of these pies to try and make impact in South Africa. And so that's why it's very important for us to find interventions to prevent HIV transmission, because if we don't, these four colliding epidemics are going to bankrupt our country. So that's why we need an HIV vaccine. And so just to go back to HIV vaccine and kind of say, okay, well, what's happened? I've showed you why South Africa needs an HIV vaccine. And so where are we and what have we done at a global level for HIV vaccine development? And there's been extraordinary work done in trying to find an HIV vaccine. And we see at a global level almost more than 300 phase 1-2 studies of interesting candidates coming into human trials. We've already had 5 phase 2B, 3 ongoing, and two other phase 2Bs that have been completed, and 4 phase 3 studies, one which is ongoing. So you can see extraordinary efforts for vaccine development. But it's been difficult, so we have not been able to crack trying to find an HIV vaccine for many reasons. And the scientific challenges are extraordinary. There's great genetic diversity, more than any other pathogen. The envelope, the outermost structure of HIV is less immunogenic than any other virus envelope because of its glycan shield. The GP160 envelope trimeric structure is hard to simulate, and there are few trimers on the surface than most viruses. The animal models that we've seen are expensive, and to date have not been back-validated for predicting vaccine efficacy. And there are no known spontaneous human cures of HIV, and hence no animal models to mimic. And so if you kind of see the backdrop, why it's so hard and why such a lot of effort is required and so much money needs to be pushed into vaccine development. If we look at the way the world has tried to fund an HIV vaccine, so in the beginning, when HIV was first discovered, most people concentrated on trying to develop a neutralizing antibody approach by looking at envelope proteins using GP120, and this did not result in a vaccine that was found to be efficacious. In 2005 to 2009, we saw a vaccine approach that looked at potent Ad5-based vaccines to try and induce a cytolytic T-cell response using a homologous prime boost strategy, so just using the same Ad5 vaccine as a prime boost strategy, which was not found to be efficacious. And from 2004 onwards, people started to look at a prime boost strategy that looked at different primes to different boosts, and this was designed in order to try and produce a broader spectrum of immune response to try and get more potency and magnitude of response. And so there have been many sheroes and heroes of HIV vaccine trials, and these are just some people that I put up here to see who've been around since the beginning of time when it comes to HIV vaccines, and a huge effort that has been fueled by the NIH, a huge financial commitment, mostly by the NIH and also by the Gates Foundation, that have really have kept the vaccine development going and seen the need to continue to invest in this response. So we're very grateful for the kind of international funding, and especially the funding from NIH and the Gates Foundation to move the vaccine field forward. So as we speak, I'm not going to talk about the 300 phase 1, phase 3, phase 2 studies, because those still need to move through the efficacy pipeline. But as we speak today, there are 3 HIV vaccine efficacy studies underway at a global level. And the first one which I will talk about is the HVTN, what we call the HVTN 702. And this is the pox protein heterologous prime boost. This was based on the RV144 vaccine trial that was shown to be efficacious. And it was based on human evidence. And this 702 adapted the RV144 trial to be Clades C specific. It met the go, no-go criteria, which meant we were able to go into efficacy. It's only been evaluated in South Africa, and we're more than 90% enrolled in both men and women in South Africa. The second one I'll talk about is a monoclonal antibody infusion of VRC01. This is HVTN 703 and 704. This was moved forward into efficacy and a proof of concept after there was evidence seen in a non-human primate challenge model. And this has been evaluated in both in MSM and heterosexual women, and this is fully enrolled at a global level. And then the last one that we will discuss is the HVTN 705, which is an Ad26 protein heterologous double prime double boost vaccine, 80% enrolled in Southern Africa, and this was advanced because there was evidence of protection in non-human primate studies, and this is in heterosexual women in sub-Saharan Africa. HVTN 706 is planned, and this will take place. It's a phase 3 trial. It'll start in the end of 2019, and it'll be in MSM at a global level, and particularly in the Americas. So let's go back to the HVTN 702. So only 3 trials we're going to talk about: 702, 703, and 705. And so 702, why did we start? Why did we do 702? And we did 702 after there was evidence of a moderate efficacy of the canary pox prime protein boost in Thailand. You can see a lovely modified intent to treat showing clear evidence that there was efficacy. You saw that there was potency at 12 months, 60% vaccine efficacy at 12 months, and then the durability, there was poor durability, so we have a moderate efficacy at 42 months. So this was the rationale for the 702. And so what did we do based on those studies in 2009 a program called the P5, which is the Protein Pox Private Partnership. I forgot the last P, but anyway, it's a P5 program consisting of both pharma and funders that sought to advance the findings of the RB144 forward and in a Clade C country. So the essential thing to do was to modify the regimen and make it Clade C specific. The first part of the program was to do the RB144 study in an immunogenicity study in South Africa, and then to do the phase 1 of the modified Clade C program, and then to, once we met the go-no-go criteria, advance it into a phase 2b3 randomized study that looks at efficacy and safety. Based on the data coming out of HVTN 100, it's a double prime and a quadruple boost to try and improve the potency of the intervention. And this just describes the strategy for the 702 program in South Africa. 705 is the other one I'm going to talk about, and this vaccine approach is not just for Clade C. It's a vaccine approach that tries to look at protecting against all clades of HIV. And the strategy for this was to use a potent vector that which induces an optimal immune response, to put inserts for global coverage, GAG, POL, and OMF into the AD26, and to make a trimeric envelope protein to improve the immune response. And this was this resulted in the first proof of concept study to get to an HIV, to get to a global vaccine. And so there you just see the prime is with the AD26 with GAG and POL, and then OMF with a Clade B and a Clade C like OMF, and then to boost with both the AD26 and with the GP140 Clade C. And there's the regimen. It's called Imbokoda, the study. And Imbokoda means if you strike a woman, you strike a rock. It was a struggle song during apartheid, where women protested about not being able to vote, and it's a symbol of women power, and that's why we call it Imbokoda. But this was based on the rationale to move Imbokoda forward was based on a non-human primate regimen that he was evaluating a whole lot of prime boost strategies, and found that the AD prime and the AD prime and the AD boost had the best chance of reducing per-risk exposure and protection after challenging the non-human primate model. So there you see the rationale to move forward. And this was also, there was a human study that mimicked this approach, and we used both this criteria in the phase 1 study and in the non-human primate to advance it into a proof of concept. The ELISpot and ELISA and ADCP were what was correlated with protection in a non-human primate study, and we'll be looking at these in our proof of concept. So we have 2 different strategies for active vaccination, and the one is the specific Clade C approach, and the other one is the global approach. One is a quiet vector, which is the LVAC. It's not very immunogenic. We have a potent adjuvant. We have a bivalent Clade C GP120, and it's based on the RB144, which saw modest efficacy in humans. And then we have the global approach, which is with a trimeric boost, an alum adjuvant, and it's based on evidence of protection in the non-human primate model. So we have both studies in the field, almost both of them enrolled. We hope to end enrollment in May this year in both studies, and then we'll follow up the participants for another 2 years. And in the interim, there will be DSMBs that will look at high efficacy, moderate efficacy, low efficacy, and futility, and give us direction about what to do with the studies. So the other question, and the other study that's in the field is a passive immunization with a neutralizing antibody. And the question is, can we protect using passive infusion of neutralizing antibodies? We heard earlier in a lovely lecture just about the development of antibodies with HIV replication, and a kind of arms race between the virus and the antibody. And at the end, around between 10 and 20% of people after 2 years without treatment have developed body neutralizing antibodies. And the issue is, can we use these antibodies to protect against HIV acquisition? And so here you see just a cartoon looking at the trimeric structure of HIV. And the first one to advance into human development is the CD4 binding site, the VRC01, and that's a study that's fully enrolled at this moment in time, and we'll hear soon whether a single monoclonal antibody VRC01 can protect against HIV acquisition. Future studies are looking at cocktails of antibodies to in an attempt to be more potent. And this is based on a non-human primate study that showed that with both rectal and vaginal challenge, non-human primates were protected using the VRC01. So the two studies I showed you have evidence of efficacy in non-human primates. One has evidence of efficacy in a similar trial in Thailand. And the importance of these studies obviously is to back correlate, to see whether the non-human primate models were predictive of efficacy in humans. So in terms of the AMP, as I said, we are completely enrolled. If you have a look at the rates, they're 90%, 96% retention, 76,000, almost 77,000 visits, and almost 35,000, 36,000 infusions at a global level, which is quite phenomenal. In places like Malawi, where they hardly have infusions, introducing drips and infusions into Zimbabwe, Malawi was an amazing feat for the AMP study. For 702, as I said, we are 90% enrolled in South Africa, and 705 are around 80% enrolled as of just last week. So all in all, we've made huge clinical trial capacity development. For 702 alone, we have about 574 clinical staff at sites all over South Africa. This graph just shows you where all our trial sites are for 702, 705, and for the AMP study. And you can see an enormous investment in capacity development and training to deliver these kind of trials in Southern Africa. So a huge investment and of sites. Even in rural parts of South Africa, we've managed to build clinical trial capacity. So in final, I've got a few more slides left, and so just to say in conclusion that there are many ways that there are many battles required to win the war against HIV. I've spoken just very little about HIV vaccines and other immune strategies. I haven't even talked about the cure strategy or even begun to look at innovations that we need to achieve the 1999 thing. So lots of work still to be done. But also to say that even if we do all of this, we have to address the issue of stigma and discrimination. And the final battle, the last mile that we will have to walk, is the fight against stigma and discrimination of people who are HIV infected. We need to reassert the dignity of those living with HIV and reassert the dignity of those who've died of HIV and in silence and in shame. And that's our last battle that we have to fight to really eradicate this epidemic. This is just a picture of, at the Global Citizen with our mantra that we have to end HIV, and using an HIV vaccine we believe is an important strategy to curtail and end HIV. There are a lot of people that I have to acknowledge through all the years. The people at the Perinatal HIV Research Unit, the NIH, other collaborators in South Africa and in the US, the Medical Research Council, Debbie Bradshaw, who's done amazing work tracking mortality over time, and was one of the bravest scientists who showed and demonstrated the fact that people were dying in their youth from HIV in the 2000s. Also, the HVTN, of which I am the co-PI, but to acknowledge all the tremendous work that the HVTN has done in vaccine development, as well as collaborators in MHRP, the Gates Foundation, and the pharmaceutical people like GSK and Janssen, and obviously DAIDS that has funded a lot of this work and continue to fund it. So we're very grateful for all the funding that we received. And I'm finished now, so you're allowed to ask me any questions. So I was on time and on budget.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. It's a wonderful presentation, and we're really grateful that after a long flight here, you're able to give us this wonderful talk. We're now open the floor for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will come and take the questions from you. Well, I have a couple myself. So given the high rate of replication of HIV, that it even exceeds that of the flu virus, and we can't even get the flu virus correct with a global vaccine as it is, how likely are we to achieve that with HIV?
Well, we don't know if we don't try.
Okay.
So that's the first step.
Fair enough.
So, we have to get candidates into human efficacy studies, and we need to see how they operate in the real world, and then we need to see what protected or what was associated with infection, and then we have to recalibrate and go back. So we have to find an HIV vaccine, and it's been a long endeavor, as you've seen, more than 300 phase 1-2 studies, efficacy studies, a handful since the beginning of the epidemic. We have evidence from RB144 that we had a moderately efficacious vaccine with some correlates of protection being established, and we need to take that data and validate it in further studies. And we will only know when we know, and if we had to always worry about failure, we would not move forward. And so it's a hard job, that's why we're still at it. But particularly for South Africa, we need an HIV vaccine because HIV and TB is bankrupting our country. It's distracting us from being able to manage our other epidemics, and it's costing the health system a lot. And so particularly for South Africa, one has to continue to move forward the vaccine science to try and understand what we have to do. And so we may be lucky, we may be partially lucky, or we may not be lucky, but each of those studies will help us move forward.
And I agree, there's always value in scientific research, regardless of the end result. There are always going to be advantages. So the second question related to that is, when you get to phase 3 or human trials, how ethically would you just, you're obviously focusing on population of focus or population of concern with PrEP, because there is a strategy that could prevent transmission, potentially, and it's not perfect, but it is effective for the most part. How likely to get ethical approval for human trials in that respect?
Well, we offer PrEP to all women. So first of all, people get standard of care, and in addition to standard of care, in the 702 and 705, we've made available PrEP for women on our studies. So at the time of informed consent, women are told about PrEP. In our videos and in their risk reduction counselling, they get told about PrEP. They can get PrEP for free from our research sites, or they can be referred into a site close by where there's a demonstration project. And so PrEP is available for free, and the monitoring of PrEP is available for free in our vaccine trials. So I think that I think that there is enough support to take PrEP in our vaccine studies.
Which is great. That's wonderful.
In South Africa, in Southern Africa.
It's wonderful that you have it for free and you have monitoring for free.
Doesn't mean people take it, but
that's
it's
true,
available.
But availability.
So it's very poor uptake. So I mean that is the sad thing, is that even though we have it for free, women aren't taking it up.
Yeah, it's I guess commitment that has to be taken seriously. Sorry, I have questions there.
Hi, thanks very much. So I just had two questions, and you can take either or neither. So the first one was with regards to sort of the backwards looking in terms of what are the causes of the epidemic. I'm wondering to what extent, or if any extent, the issues of apartheid and sort of post-apartheid, what role they do play in sort of the description of the epidemic that you provided. And then the second question is, with regards to the vaccine, one of the things that we're dealing with a lot in North America and Vancouver or otherwise is around sort of trust of science and trust of scientists. And I'm wondering whether you can sort of speak to trust of science and scientists within the South African perspective.
Okay. So both the epidemic of HIV and TB have been modeled on a cheap male labor system, migrating men from rural areas into the economic hub, which central area, Johannesburg, where the gold mines were. And so from pre-apartheid, so there was a gold rush in the 1890s, and very soon the mining barons realized that they needed to, because the ore was quite hard to get, and so I needed cheap black labor to maximize profits. So men were shipped in from all over Africa, and basically this cheap male migrant labor system fueled both HIV and TB in South Africa, and so it set the role for HIV to come in. So already in the late 70s, early 90s, miners coming from Malawi and Zambia were found to be HIV infected. The mines repatriated all those that were HIV infected back into the countries. As South Africa opened up, more people came in, and so between the migrant labor system and the opening up of South Africa post-apartheid allowed the epidemic to take hold from about 85. And so I guess that I would blame the colonial system. So even before the Nationalist Party called it apartheid, the labor system was set in place to fuel an epidemic of TB and HIV, which we haven't been able to get rid of. And until we address the issue of migrant labor and all the inequities, it's going to be hard to combat those. And the second question was on, what was the second question again?
Trust of scientists.
Okay. So I guess South Africa is lucky, particularly with vaccines, and so we have very high vaccination rates in childhood, and so it kind of so vaccines are kind of seen as good things that have protected children from death and disease, and so the concept of a vaccine has not been difficult. I guess particularly in South Africa, Western medicine, was fairly well entrenched, and I guess the biggest problem about the health system in South Africa is that it's not really receptive to key populations like sex workers men who have sex with men and adolescents. And so it's a very moralistic, judgmental health system. Sex workers are ostracized, they're not given treatment for STDs. Men who have sex with men are marginalized in the clinics, and young girls are scolded for wanting contraception. So our biggest problem is values clarification and having a very moralistic health system that stigmatizes populations and sometimes prevent adequate care of people who are HIV infected. And we have cases with mother-to-child transmission where in the days where we were using nevirapine, if a mom forgot her nevirapine at home, the nurse would withhold the nevirapine to her baby, so to punish her for being a bad mother. And we have legal termination of pregnancy in South Africa, but women are forced to queue in the road outside and not allowed to come into the clinic space. And so we have a huge problem with the way healthcare workers deliver care, and we need to do a lot of values clarification around that. So those are the kind of issues that we face. So much more around making sure that the health system that people receive is not judgmental.
It's great to see a country that's pro-vaccine, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. My question is about privatization of healthcare, because it's through the World Bank and IMF and all the globalization issue. How is it affecting the health service delivery? And I think you mentioned somewhere that health system is crumbling. So how is the balance between public and private? And the second question is, South Africa is known as a source of doctors, nurses who come to North America or Europe. How does the exodus of medical personnel affect the medical care?
Yeah, so those are good questions. So South Africa has 80% of the cost of care goes to 20% of people who have private insurance, health insurance. And so there is inequity in terms of the rich get the good care and the poor get the 20%. And so we're moving towards a universal, so obviously there's a commitment to universal health coverage, and we are moving towards national health insurance, where there will be one pot of money for the delivery of healthcare. So in the way hopefully the rich will subsidize the poor, the sick, the healthy, the sick, and the young, the old. And so that's the concept which we'll be moving towards in the next 5 years, is a national health insurance. And the devil's in the detail, that's for sure. The reason why our health system is crumbling is because we have corruption, and all the money that should have gone into health went into people's back pockets. And so that we have a huge problem of corruption, state capture, mismanagement of tenders, and that permeates into all parts of South Africa. The issue of migration, not only South Africa, but the rest of Africa, fuels the foreign graduates in the first world. So even the shithole countries that Trump talks about manages to supply great graduates to countries. What do you do about it? So in terms of some of the things we do, so in the SADC countries in South Africa, there are agreements not to poach doctors and nurses. So if you're a nurse in Zimbabwe, it's very hard for you to get a job in South Africa, but it's very easy for you to get a job in Ireland or in Arab Emirates. And if you're a doctor, it's easier to get a job, I guess, in Canada than in South Africa. So until you address the issue of transformation, so one of the things we do in South Africa is to try and ensure that we transform the workforce. And so making sure that we train more black doctors, and because black doctors are more likely to stay in South Africa than white middle class doctors. And so over the years there's been a transformation of the workforce of doctors. Nurses have mostly been black in South Africa. And so they still are poached to other parts of the world, but it will always be a problem, supply and demand. And I guess until rich countries stop poaching from poor countries, it will always be a problem. But I also think it's also hard to stop movement of people. People move for lots of reasons: economic, safety, better options, and hopefully what we can have is brain circulation. And so if you do move to the US or Canada, that you have some kind of diaspora program where you give back to the country that you left. And we're seeing much more of that going on, is a commitment of people to support work and science in other parts of the world. So that's it's a problem that all poor countries are going to have, is the loss of highly talented people who have better options in other parts of the world.
Cognizant of time, just one last question here.
Thank you very much for your talk. I actually wanted to ask about sustainability and scale up of passive infusion technologies. So if you could comment on sort of what that entails, how often, assuming that the VRC01 trial will be positive, what does that mean with respect to moving forward about cost and the number of times and how often the infusions would have to be administered? Because many people would appreciate this, but an infusion is different than coming in for a shot or a boost of your vaccine. This is a very, and there's no lasting immunity. It would have to be in perpetuity.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for the VRC1 study was a proof of concept. We were using the infusion to see whether neutralizing antibodies could prevent HIV acquisition. Obviously, if that works, you have to move to subcut and long acting and probably cocktails of that. And so there is work looking at long acting subcutaneous injections. And so the movement would be to either move to something that's more scalable or to learn what happened in passive immunization, see whether you can do other work. And there's work with B-cell lineage, germ cell vaccination using transmitter founder virus envelope, where you coax the immune system into developing those broadly neutralizing antibodies. And so I guess the VRC01 is essentially a proof of concept that will either lead to subcutaneous antibodies or it'll lead to some kind of active immunization that will bring along the immune system. And so there is some work already with B-cell lineage programs, and then also there's work done to try and get these monoclonal antibodies into something that's more usable. The drip it's an amazing thing. So we thought that we would never be able to do infusions in places outside South Africa, and that no one was ever going to want the drip. And the most amazing thing, and maybe it's a powerful symbol. People love the drip. Maybe it's like a bazooka. Something that's powerful. You put this infusion in my body, and so sometimes I worry that that's what people want. That they want the drip because it's a huge symbol of protection. It's a powerful weapon, and I sometimes worry that moving from an infusion to an injection kind of will take will take away the feeling that this is a powerful intervention. But it's not scalable at all. We definitely need stuff that's scalable, and so this will just give us. It's just not scalable. Although women loved it. They didn't like PrEP, but they loved the infusion. It's strange.
And I'm aware we are almost out of time, so I'm sorry if I didn't get all the questions.
There was one
There's
question.
One more. Would you like? Okay, that'll be the last one.
Okay, thank you. South Africa is known to have a lot of sangomas. You know sangoma, right? The traditional healers in your language. One wonders, how is the health system managing to coexist with the traditional healers, given that for effect people are consulting the traditional healers or the sangomas in your language? Does that frustrate the health system? If it does it complement it? If it does it supplement it? If it does, how do you deal with that? And can you relate that with how does it affect the antiretroviral therapy in the South African population in that context?
Yeah, so traditional medicine and traditional healers should never ever frustrate a Western model of care, and they should coexist synergistically together. And I guess, and that may happen in some parts of Africa, and it may not happen in other parts. I was just hearing from in Botswana, you're not allowed to take traditional medicine if you are HIV infected. It's kind of underground, and I think that's more problematic than if you coexist well together. It's important to coexist because obviously if there are drug interactions between traditional medicine and modern medicine, you need to know and be able to study it. And so it doesn't serve anyone well not to coexist properly together. Also, you have to understand the tradition, the belief system of people, and to not respect the belief system of people would mean that would lead to a distrust of modern medicine. And so I think that there are efforts and there's certain lovely examples where it works very well together. In HIV vaccine research, we have traditional healers on our cab. When we did our first HIV vaccine trial in Soweto, we killed a goat to appease the ancestors. It was a bit tricky because we had the SPC. A goat has to bleat. When you kill a goat, it has to bleat so the ancestors can hear. And then the SPCA didn't want the goat to bleat because we had to kill the goat in a humane way. But between the SPCA and the traditional healer, we managed to get it right, and the ancestors were very happy with us in Soweto. So you have to, you can't. Traditional medicine and traditional beliefs are a very important part of people's life, and you can't ignore that. And so the quicker Orthodox or Western medicine works with traditional medicine, the better for everybody, because at least then you can see, you can cooperate. There are things that the Western doctor can't do that the Sangoma can, and vice versa. So it's important for synergy if we were looking at the whole person.
I'm afraid we're out of time at this moment. I'd like to thank you again for your generosity of time and expertise. It's been a personal privilege listening to you. I'm sure for everybody else here, we've enjoyed your talk tonight. And let's again thank Dr. Gray for her great...
Thanks.